On today's podcast for Inquiry, I speak with Sandra Dunham. Sandra has a Master's of Public Administration from Dalhousie University and over 30 years of experience leading non-religious charities in Canada. She has served as the Centre for Inquiry Canada's Executive Director since 2017 and currently operates a consulting agency supporting small charities and nonprofits. Sandra talks about the Centre for Inquiry Canada's Cost of Religion reports, which detail how the various levels of government in Canada subsidize religious charities by an astonishing amount, $5.6 billion in 2018 alone. To inform you of what this number does and does not include and how it was calculated, I bring you my conversation with Sandra Dunham. Welcome to the Podcast for Inquiry, brought to you by the Centre for Inquiry Canada, a national educational charity supporting your community for reason, compassion, and secular humanist values. You have answers, we have questions. I'm your host, Leslie Rosenblood, board member and secular chair for CFIC. Welcome. Sandra Dunham, Executive Director for the Centre for Inquiry Canada. Welcome to Podcast for Inquiry.
Thanks, Leslie. Happy to be here.
I want to talk to you today about a series of reports that the CFIC published a couple of years ago about the cost of religion in Canada. And I think just off the top, I should, in the spirit of full disclosure, let everybody know that you and I were the primary authors on these reports and that a number of volunteers also made significant contributions to the content. So let's start with the headline figure, Sandra. We calculated using CRA data the cost of religion in Canada. What was the cost of religion in Canada?
It was about $5.6 billion in 2018.
Wow. Okay, we're going to talk about how we got to that number in a minute, but I think it's important that we first establish some context. So the title of the series of reports was The Cost of Religion in Canada. Was there any attempt to measure the benefits of religion so that we can have a weighing process?
No, we did not do that, although we did discuss whether it was appropriate that people saw religion as offering these benefits in the community. Because clearly we did get some pushback from people saying, oh, well, churches do this and churches do that. So we do have quite a bit of dialogue about that. Whether it's appropriate that churches do it and whether they do the good works in order to achieve good outcomes, or whether they do the good works in order to attract more people to their faith group.
Right. And there's generally, in my experience, no shortage of general knowledge about the purported and actual good works that religious institutions provide in the country.
It's true. But, I'd like to put out, I am a member of a local bridge club, which, of course, is not a charity. It's a nonprofit, and that local bridge club collects a mountain full of food to donate to people in need at this time of the season. But I don't think anybody believes that I go to play bridge in order to give people food, right? I just do it because it's a good fellowship opportunity with other people who share an interest.
Okay, that sounds good. Now, there's lots of different potential costs of religion. And did this series of reports, was it a comprehensive look at the costs? So let's to start with the social costs of religion and some of the, can you identify what they might be and whether the reports took those into account?
Right. So when we talked about the cost of religion, we really focused very narrowly on financial cost of a certain aspect of religion. We very briefly touched on some of the societal costs of religion. So we do know that secular societies fare better. So we know that societies that are more religious, and this could be a nation or it could be a part of a nation, so maybe a state in the United States that we know is more religious than another, fare worse on almost every social outcome. We didn't delve deeply into why that would be the case, um, but we do know that secular nations or secular societies do better in terms of wealth, employment, um, teenage pregnancy, drug use, mental health, and addictions. Almost any indicator that you and I and everybody listening would agree is a positive outcome will be more readily achieved in a state that is secular.
Right, and people that are interested in learning more about that can listen to the podcast for inquiry episode with Phil Zuckerman, which was released in January of 2023.
Yeah, and that really, I think that we had the discussion, you and I, writing the papers before that podcast. But when I heard Phil, I was like, oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. So it really resonated. And I think it's important that people recognize that religion is not benign.
Okay, so we're focused on just the financial costs. Was it at least comprehensive in the financial costs of religion? So I can think of, for example, three provinces that fund Catholic schools. The province of Manitoba gives subsidies to private religious schools. There are Catholic hospitals across Canada, all of which receive significant amounts of government funds. Are these expenditures tracked in the cost of religion reports?
No. So we do discuss the absence of those. So there's also Catholic and Jewish family service agencies. I mean, almost any type of social service, there are religious groups that step up to operate them, including, interestingly, immigrant settlement services, which, often the people who are resettling to escape some religious persecution. And yet, the national organization that does that is, I believe, Catholic. So there's a huge number of organizations that are run by faith groups, but they are not identified. They're under the charitable head, advancement of religion. So the only organizations we looked at were ones that self-identified as being charities in order to promote religion.
So you said $5.6 billion. This doesn't include any social costs of religion. It doesn't include any of the funding of religious institutions like the schools or hospitals, family services. All of this is, as you just said, there's $5.6 billion that are just going to religious charities. Is that correct?
It is. And further,
Mm-hmm.
when we wrote the report, we were very careful not to be accused of exaggerating anything. So all of our methodology is very, very clearly explained. But in addition, um, we we have elected not to try to guess at anything. So if there's something out there that might potentially cost money, but we can't nail it down, we didn't guess at it. So the 5.6 is conservative.
All right, so let's delve into that. I mean, $5.6 billion each and every year is an enormous amount of money. Let's get into how we came up with that number. Now, let's talk about what a religious charity is, and you mentioned that briefly just a moment ago. What is a charity in Canada? What do you have to be, and in order to be considered a charity in Canada? And how did we determine what is a religious charity for the purposes of this report?
Okay, so the government of Canada recognizes the huge value, the huge financial value to being a charity. And so, in order to be a charity, the first thing you have to do is have your charitable purpose approved by the Canada Revenue Agency. And so, the Canada Revenue, so really, charities are very democratic in that the government, in some way, is matching our contributions to charities. So when I write a check at the end of the year to a charity that I value, the government sort of matches it, right? Because they give me a write-off on my income tax. So they say, if you believe in this, if a lot of Canadians believe in this cause, then we also will support it. So it's quite democratic in a way. But obviously, we have a lot of Canadians, let's say, who, uh, well, like my example, play bridge. But playing bridge doesn't benefit everybody. It benefits the people who play bridge. So just because we have a common interest in something doesn't make it charitable. It has to do good for other people. It has to improve the welfare of society. So the government has 4 areas in which they say if you fall under one of these heads of charity, we will grant you this status that allows you to give people tax relief if they give you money. So the 4 charitable purposes, one is advancement of education. So that's where you'd find your universities and colleges, but also charitable organizations like CFIC that try to provide education that will improve the lives of Canadians. There's relief of poverty. So that's where you would find your food banks, and a variety of other organizations that make life generally easier for people who are living in poverty. And interestingly, prevention of poverty is not considered a charitable purpose under the relief of
Oh,
poverty.
only addressing the symptoms
Yes.
of poverty. Okay,
So,
the
so
effects.
there's other ways that, for example, credit counseling might be considered charitable, but it's not under relief of poverty.
Okay.
Okay, the third one is kind of a catch-all, which is other purposes that are beneficial to society. So that's where healthcare fits in, for example. There is no healthcare head of charity. It would fit under other purposes. Or the work that CFIC does in supporting refugees. That doesn't fit under poverty and it doesn't fit under education. So it fits under this other purpose category. But the fourth purpose is the one that I find incredibly problematic and that I'm not sure that Canadians understand, which is called advancement of religion. And so the Canadian government considers the purpose of advancing religion to be charitable. And I actually have the definition that they use here, and I'm just going to read it to you because it's so telling. To advance religion in the charitable sense means to preach and advance the spiritual teachings of a religious faith and to maintain the doctrines and spiritual observances on which those teachings are based, such as establishing and maintaining buildings for religious worship and other religious use, organizing and providing religious instruction, and carrying out pastoral and missionary work. So that is the definition on the Canadian government website. I haven't made this up. I haven't paraphrased. This is exactly what you would read if you went to the charitable purpose advancement of religion Canada Revenue Agency. And further, I hope I'm not going on too long about this because it's offensive to me. And that is sort of the motivation behind these reports. In 2004, there was a foundation that was sued by the government, and the government said, you are not charitable in the advancement of religion sense. And so the courts actually, in 2004, which is fairly recent, provided a definition, and the full definition is in the report, but some of the words, the reports that we wrote, that they used were promoting specific religious doctrine, spreading its message ever wider among mankind, and taking some positive steps to sustain and increase religious belief in a variety of ways, which may be comprehensively described as pastoral and missionary.
So, as you know, I'm a fairly passionate secularist, by which I mean I want government to be neutral in matters of religion. And so what we have here is the government essentially tipping the scales, saying if what you're doing is advancing religion, you are proselytizing, you're doing missionary work, you're evangelizing, whichever faith it is that you belong to, the government is willing to give you all the benefits, the significant benefits of being a charity with and is with the tax write-offs and subsidies that go along with that. So that
Absolutely.
so the advancement of religion as a charitable purpose is a violation of the secular principles that we here at CFIC hold so dear.
Absolutely. And
Okay.
yes, and remembering that in Canada we support that for every religion, right? So we have religions literally fighting for people to come to their faith, and we're funding all of them to fight with each other. But what the government will not fund is a humanist association to under this category because we don't worship a god.
Right. So there's a interestingly, yeah. So there's a theistic requirement there
Yes,
that in order to qualify for this, you have to worship a god or a deity of some kind. What I found fascinating is that there is a specific exemption made for Buddhism, which
yes,
is considered a religion under
yes,
by the Canadian government, even though many, if not most, strands of Buddhism do not have an explicitly theistic worldview.
yes.
All right. So when I think of a charity, and I think of the money of the charity, where it comes from donations, at least in large part. Like that seems to be the biggest thing, right? So every year, every month, in fact, I give a donation to the Center for Inquiry Canada, and then once a year, I get a charitable receipt. It tells me the amount that I contributed over the course of the year, and then on I submit that to on my tax forms, and I get a significant portion of that back in the form of a reduction in the amount of income tax I have to pay.
Right.
So when we're talking about the $5.6 billion that religious charities get every year, I'm imagine a significant portion of that is from the donations that people give to charities and the tax credits that those donors receive. So uh, can you get into how we what that number was and how we came up with it?
Yep. So we asked CRA to give us the tax information for charities. So charities every year file a form called a T3010, and they provide a lot of information, and some of it's financial. So we had CRA give us that for 2018, which at the time of the report was the most recent complete year of data. And what we did is we looked only at charities who had the classification advancement of religion, and then
So
we told.
this is self-declared, right? Like this is the charities themselves made that declaration. There was no judgment on behalf. There was nothing that there was no editorial judgment. There was no subjective element. This is strictly the charities that themselves said their primary purpose is advancement
Yes,
of religion. Okay.
that's so. Then we summed up the column that provided um, either donations that they issued tax receipts for, which is one of the financial reporting requirements. And we added the, um, the gifts from other charities. And the reason we did that, many of our supporters give to us through Canada Helps. We don't issue a tax receipt for that. Canada Helps issues the tax receipt. And then Canada Helps donates the money to us, but there still was a tax receipt issued in order that that money came to us. So those were the two line items that we totaled. And so we calculated the total value of tax receipts issued by religious charities in Canada. And then we calculated the tax benefit. And we actually had a wonderful retired CA help us, chartered accountant help us with this, John. And so there's a lot of subtleties to how tax law works. So first of all, when you make donations to charities, the first $200 of donations to any charity are valued less than every dollar beyond 200 that you issue, that you receive a tax receipt for. Also, if you are in the highest tax bracket, so I think I wrote down the amount. I didn't. If you're in the highest tax bracket, you get significantly more back from both the federal government and the provincial government. And of course, every province has a different tax rate. So what we did is we separated all of the charities into provinces according to where their head office is. So it's not 100% accurate because there may be a church that or a religious charity that has supporters in more than one province, but it's the best that we could do. We
Right.
calculated the federal tax rate and the provincial tax rate on that donation amount. So we did actually calculate two figures. One would be if everybody donated only $200 to charity, which is unrealistic. But the other one was a more realistic. Let's say that this is $201 plus that goes to all charities that we're calculating. However, we did not calculate any of the high income amounts. And we do know that people who are in the top income bracket are more likely to give more money to charity. So we feel that this was sort of a good compromise and a conservative estimate of the total
So,
amount.
just to be clear, then there are limitations to the data, so we can't be 100% specific to the dollar. But we made very conservative estimates, and in fact, the number that you're about to provide me is almost certainly lower than the actual benefit received.
Yes.
Okay.
And if you think about your own charitable tax return, if you do it, you're asked, all you really need to provide is a total amount. You don't ever need to, you may if you want to, but you don't have to tell the government which charity you gave it to. You just give them a total. So we can't use individual tax returns to work backwards. We can only work from the charity's T3010 forward.
Okay.
So yes, conservative. This is conservative. We feel very confident in the fact that the number would not be less than this.
All right. And so, what is that number from the like? What's the tax benefit that religious charities get from issuing donation receipts?
I feel like I should have a drum roll. It is $3.2 billion.
Wow. So over half of the amount, the total amount that that religious charities benefit from is just from issuing tax receipts.
That's correct.
Wow. Okay. So, but that still leaves $2.4 billion of benefit if they don't get that from the tax receipts that they issue. Where does the remaining nearly $2.5 billion come from?
Okay, that's a great question. And each of the reports in the series looks at one or two specific things. So the second report we did looked at government transfers. So often the government will fund a charity or a nonprofit to deliver a basket of services to the community. So hospitals are all charities,
Mm-hmm.
the foundations are. And so the government transfers money so that they can provide a service. And similarly, the
So,
government,
like, when you say something like when transfers money, that's basically the government just gives them money. Like here's $1 million, here's $15 million, here's $250,000 to do this thing that we
yes,
want you to do. Okay.
yes. So in Canada, transfers are made by federal governments, provincial governments, and municipal governments. So again, we had to separate all the data by province, and then each T3010, each charity's T3010 reports on total government transfers, but not what the government transferred money to do. So we know the amount, but we don't know what they were paid to do.
Mm-hmm.
So the Canadian government transferred $140 million to religious charities in 2018. Combined, the provinces and territories transferred $750 million, and municipalities transferred $217 million. So that was a total of $1.1 billion.
Right. And so these are charities whose primary purpose is to advance religion. It is possible, and it is certain that some of them, in addition to advancing religion, also will teach English classes or French classes to immigrants will also, as part of their activities, run a soup kitchen once a month or once a week or whatever.
Yes, and the other limitation of the report, and you've already mentioned this, Leslie, is that the charities are self-reporting. So there is one group of charities that are in under that fall. Many of them fall under advancement of religion, and I just want to have full disclosure. And I don't think that they belong here. And in fact, I think that it would be in their best interest to reapply and to change this because this is so historical. And that is the Ys. So the
Wise.
YM and the YWCAs. So,
Ah, yes. Okay.
yes. So if you think about Young Men Christian Association, way back when they were set up as an association for Christians, clearly, probably in our lifetime, they have not had that Christian focus, at least not to my knowledge. And when I go in and I investigate some of the Christian, the YWCAs, their missions have nothing to do with Christianity in 2018 or 2023 or 2024. So the reason that I bring that up, besides full disclosure, is because the largest municipal transfer to a charity was to a Y. And that's actually how I discovered that the Ys were in here. Because I want you to picture a database of 32,000 charities. So I have an Excel spreadsheet. It has 32,000 lines on it. So there's no way with that number that our manpower was able to go through and say, oh no, we don't think this one is a charity. So it's there, we can't extract it. I eyeballed it, and there were a number of Ys. There were not a lot of other charities that I saw whose names suggested to me they were anything but a religious charity. And I guess technically the Young Men's Christian Association would suggest to me that they might be.
Right, but we happen to know. I mean, certainly the Village People were not being proselytizing when they sang about that organization.
Oh, absolutely.
So again, okay. So again, just to be clear, it's self-reporting. There are probably religious proselytizing organizations that have self-reported under education or alleviation of poverty or other beneficial purposes, and
Absolutely.
and we're not playing the role of auditor here. We are trusting that the self-reporting is accurate. Our report is precisely as accurate as the data that is provided, and we leave it to the Canada Revenue Agency to ensure that the amount of inaccurate filings for whatever reason is kept to a minimum.
Right.
So, but you did say you base that. That brings up another a question that I have. You said you did look over the nearly, what did you say, nearly 40,000 charities
32.
that 32,000 religious charities, self-declared religious charities. Based on your, and this will be a subjective impression, but based on your analysis of the data, how many of them were Christian versus other faiths? Do you have that breakdown?
I absolutely do, because they actually have to report not only what faith group they're in, but the specifics. So, like, not just that they're Christian, but they're Catholic or they're Protestant.
Ah, okay.
So,
so again, this isn't your analysis. This is the self-reported data. Okay, this is great. Okay, so this is more accurate than I thought it was going to be. Excellent.
Oh yes. So I did not, for the purposes of today's podcast, copy down those totals, but
Okay.
I did copy down that 80% of the organizations reported as being Christian charities.
Okay, so that's the vast majority are one form of Christian or another.
Absolutely. Leslie, can we come back to these government transfers? Because I was aghast when I did. So I told you that the biggest municipal transfer, which was to a Y. I didn't write down the amount because I don't consider the Y a transfer to a Christian organization. But I want to talk about the largest provincial and federal one, because I was stunned.
Okay, so yeah, let's talk about that.
Okay, so the province of Ontario transfers $163.4 million to Christian Horizons. So Christian Horizons provides residential support for individuals with developmental disabilities.
That
Sounds
sounds
okay?
charitable.
Yes, and I agree it's charitable. However, they do it in a Christian manner. So part of their providing this service is that they are proselytizing to the developmentally delayed individuals in their care. And having worked in developmental services, I'm going to tell you, it is very challenging to find a residential space for your son or daughter who has a developmental disability. And as parents age, and either they physically are no longer able to care for these people that they love very deeply, or they become concerned that they're going to die and the person they provide care for will have no care, they need to find somewhere to care for their sons and daughters. So you, as an atheist, Leslie, if you were facing the end of your life and your son or daughter was facing homelessness, and you had a choice between them becoming homeless or them going to a Christian residential setting, I'm pretty confident you are going to allow them to go to a Christian residential setting, even though what they are being taught is 100% oppositional to everything you believe in. So is it appropriate that $163 million of residential care for individuals who are developmentally delayed comes with Christian strings attached? I'm going to leave that to everyone to make their own decision on. I mean, I'm sure by the way I'm telling you this, you know what my thoughts are.
All right, so that's the largest provincial transfer goes to Christian Horizons. What about the largest federal transfer?
All right, hold on to your hat. The
Okay.
largest federal transfer is $22.2 million that goes to the Kelowna Christian Center. So
Okay.
their tagline is "Where people belong and Jesus matters." And the services that they provide, this is in the their reporting to the government, so the government knows this.
Mm-hmm.
They provide weekly church services. They provide Christian education and preschool and daycare, Christian education, preschool, and daycare.
Mm-hmm.
They provide Christian outreach, local, provincial, national, and international pastoral care.
So, to my mind, all of that sounds like perfectly legitimate for a religious organization to do. Those are
Not
perfectly
with my
legitimate
tax
activities.
dollars.
But yeah, where it becomes wrong is that the government should not be funding it either directly or indirectly. And
I
by
find it
being
obscene. It is obscene.
so they're kind of getting a double benefit, right? They're not only do they issue tax receipts when people donate the money, and so they get the benefit of that, but they're also getting tens of millions of dollars in direct government subsidies uh, for these sectarian activities.
Yes.
All right, I can see why you are you are upset by this. That's again that's a uh, as a violation of secular principles. I'm against that as well. Okay, so we've got $5.6 billion from the government to religious organizations every year. We've got $3.2 billion of that is from issuing tax receipts. We've got $1.1 billion in direct funding. That still leaves about, according to my mental arithmetic, about $1.3 billion remaining. So
Right.
what else? How else does the government fund, or directly or indirectly, religious charities in Canada?
Okay. So this is tax. So it's very interesting because when we talk to many people who are opposed to religion in some way, or at least feel that religion should not get special treatment, they talk about taxing the churches, and mostly what they're talking about is income tax. And this is surprisingly maybe where we don't find that there's very much opportunity, there's very much cost to us. Because so I'm going to go back to my bridge club. My bridge club is a nonprofit, right? We share a common interest. We play bridge. We come together, lots and lots of benefit to those of us who like that activity. And we come together and we do it, and it's a nonprofit. So there's never any money that goes from the bridge club to the members of the bridge club, right? The money is all reinvested in the bridge club. We buy dealing machines or whatever. So if churches were not charities, they likely would be nonprofits, right? People are putting money into the collection plate. They're members of that church, but the church is never going to distribute that money back to its members. So maybe it's going.
It's not a corporation in that sense.
No, it is a nonprofit corporation, and nonprofit corporations pay taxes on very, very few things. So they can pay taxes on rental income. And if you think about your church often does rent out its space to people. So they do have rental income, and they do report on rental income. Now, again, I told you we had John Manuel, who is a retired chartered accountant, help us with this report. So the nuances of the Income Tax Act and rental income, I'm going to fully admit, is over my head, and John helped us to write it.
So, but I think the key message then is we had a volunteer who had the requisite expertise to ensure that the numbers that we're reporting are accurate and are the way the law is actually structured.
That's correct. So there is no way from the T3010 of knowing what type of rental income the religious charities are getting, and therefore we could not assign any income tax to that. So in spite of the fact that some churches or religious charities may in fact be subject to some income tax, we had absolutely no way of assessing that, so we did not include it.
Okay, so whatever the number actually is, we just put in 0 so we could be sure not to over-report.
That's correct.
Okay.
So the other thing that happens within businesses, if anyone has a business, when you pay out HST or GST and provincial sales tax, you do a report at the end of the year, and you get some of that back. In actually the case of a for-profit, you get all of that back, right? So as a business myself, I charge HST. I'm in Ontario, so it's HST. And anything that I purchase for my business, I directly deduct from the HST I receive. So every dollar of HST that I spend for business purposes, I get back. So charities are not able to do that because they don't charge HST. But what they do get back, the government wants to say, well, we don't want to unduly penalize you for spending money. So we're going to give you back what we call a public service body rebate, PSB. And so charities get approximately 50% of their HST or GST and PST back. So again, this was a really tough thing to calculate because when you look at their expenses, they would not have paid HST on all of their expenses. So for example, if they pay their leader, their priest, that's a salary, they don't pay HST on it. So we couldn't assign an amount of, I'm just going to say HST because it's easier for me. So what John did for us is he looked at the expense line and he calculated what he thought was an extraction factor. So how much of that would be subject to HST and would be returned in the form of a public service body rebate. So again, we were very conservative. If we didn't know, we didn't charge it. And the total rebates that religious charities, we feel, would get. And I encourage people to read the report because the methodology is laid out. And in the cases where we really did use John's expertise, my ability to articulate it is limited. But the total amount that we came up with was $318 million.
Okay, and we'll link the we'll link to the full reports in the show notes. So anyone who's interested, just click on that link. It'll take you to all of the reports, and anyone who's interested can read them for themselves. Okay, so 318 million dollars in terms of essentially HST or GST rebates.
Right.
Okay.
So the other area that we looked into was property tax exemptions and rebates. So this was really tough to do because
Well,
for
before
people
you
who
get into the methodology, tell us what a property tax rebate is, or benefit is.
okay, so we all pay property tax, and if you have a business, you pay property tax on that business. But there are different classes of property tax. So possibly you all know that farms pay a lower level of property tax than residential. Um, and every municipality has a different tax rate. So churches in every province and territory, not all religious charities, but churches are exempt from paying any property tax.
And by churches, you mean all houses of worship, right? It applies
Yes,
also to
thank you.
synagogues and mosques and so on.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
All houses of worship are exempt. And in some provinces, the cemeteries and properties surrounding, like all of the property that goes with the house of worship, is also exempt. And in some, it's not. And even where it's not, some municipalities may exempt them, even if others in the same province don't. So the other huge challenge to trying to figure out the cost of this exemption is the way that, so we know what the reported capital property values are for churches and religious charities in Canada because they report that. But the way that that is calculated, the value of the land, is the purchase price of the land is frozen. So if you purchased a 10-acre property in 1910 for $4,000, that is the value of that land until it's sold.
Right. So it's what's called book value in accounting terms.
The book value. So it's not,
Yeah.
it does not appreciate.
And
The
I imagine that if a church has been on in existence for the past century plus, whatever they paid for that land in the early 20th century is worth like orders of magnitude, two orders of magnitude more, or if not greater, in the early 21st century.
Right. And like I might argue, since we did the report in 2018, that the value of that land might be significantly more in 2024 than
Right. Yeah.
in 2018. So this is something, it's a moving target. The other thing is that the building on the property is depreciated. So if you paid $10,000 to build a church or a synagogue or a mosque in 1910, the value of that church, synagogue, or mosque is less today than it was then. It depreciates every year, unless you make a capital investment in it. So if you do a big renovation, then suddenly it's worth more. Let's say they renovated in 1950, then suddenly they add the $500,000 renovation to the capital asset, and they start depreciating it again. So we have a situation where normally I would have thrown up my hands and said, "Well, we can't do this because we don't know the value of the property, and we don't know the mill rate. So how are we going to do this?" But as it turned out, New Brunswick did an analysis of all of the property tax exemptions that it offered. So it wasn't just to churches. They did property tax exemptions for a number of reasons, and they did an analysis of that. And so what we were able to do is we calculated the book value of the property of the all of the religious charities in New Brunswick, and we figured out the ratio of the value of the property to the cost of the property tax exemption in New Brunswick. So I should tell you, they did specify in New Brunswick the cost of religious tax exemptions. And we just factored that. We made it a ratio across the board. So we said, well, if the savings was thus in New Brunswick, or the cost was thus in New Brunswick, this many times the book value of the property, then we're going to use the same ratio everywhere in Canada. So it's very approximate. I don't want anyone to think this number is set in stone, or
So, but again, it's the best possible number with the data that is available.
Absolutely. And I don't feel that we in any way exaggerated. Like, I don't think New Brunswick is different than any other place. In fact, some might argue that the appreciation of property in New Brunswick might have been less than, say,
Well,
Ontario.
certainly, I would imagine that in the large municipalities of the nation, say Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, and so on, that land appreciation has been much greater in those places than in pretty much anywhere in New Brunswick.
Correct. But again, we didn't make any of those assumptions. We just said, this is how much it costs New Brunswick, so let's figure it out for the nation. And so the property tax exemptions would total $881 million in Canada.
Okay, so that is nearly $1 billion. And if I'm doing the mental arithmetic correctly, that leaves about $100 million remaining. I think we're summing to about $5.5 billion. So where's
you're quick on your feet.
So where's the other $100 million come from?
So we did not do this calculation ourselves, because our friends at the BC Humanist Association did this calculation. So they looked at the clergy residence exemption. So
and what is the clergy residence exemption?
If you are the head of a religious order, mm-hmm. and that religious order provides you with a place to live, mm-hmm. so people might know the term manse, but there would be others, you do not have to pay income tax on that benefit.
Oh,
so think about if your workplace gives you a car, right? It is called a taxable benefit because you pay taxes on it because it's like income. But in this case, members of the clergy do not have to pay for a home. But it's not a taxable benefit; it's a non-taxable benefit.
And so the value of that across the country, with all of the clergy of various faiths, that benefit essentially by making it non-taxable instead of taxable, it costs the government $100 million every year.
That's it.
Wow. So we bring that all together. So let me see if I've got this right. We have the charities, we have religious charities. They issue tax receipts for $3.2 billion. We have the various governments that transfer money to directly funding charities for a little over $1 billion. We've got the public service rebates, which are essentially our GST and HST refunds for $318 million. Is that right?
Yep.
Property tax exemptions for almost $900 million, and then clergy residence exemption for $100 million, all of which comes up to $5.6 billion each and every year.
Every year. Well, I'm assuming it's more. Like that's frozen.
Right. Sorry. Yeah. As the economy grows, as people give more, that was the specific amount in 2018. And so it's probably 5.8, possibly even $6 billion in 2023. We just haven't done the numbers.
And Leslie, if I could just add for our listeners, I know 2018 today might sound really old, but there's quite a lag time between when a year occurs and when the government has the reporting for that year in its system. So these reports were just written in 2022. They're not ancient reports.
Right. Okay. So you mentioned before we said at the beginning of this conversation, you mentioned that there were other costs that religion preys upon society, and that it's not as beneficial. Whatever good things they do, whether that religious charities may do, whether it's running soup kitchens or homes for the aged or for the disabled, there are some very real social costs involved with religious organizations and their prevalence in society. Can you talk for a moment about what some of those are, and why we should be a little bit leery of those that uh, claim that that religious organizations provide a net benefit to society?
Well, I mean, yes, like there are just so many that it's difficult. I mean, if you start with colonization and the fact that churches were equal partners in that idea that our way of life is better than your way of life, and it's bad enough that that happened in our past, but it's still happening. And that's something I like. We are allowing and funding churches to continue to try to convert the heathens, and they do it here at home and they do it internationally. When I talked about the Kelowna Christian Center that's receiving $22.2 million in federal transfers, their one of their goals is international missionary work. So they are still going out and trying to tell people what you believe is wrong and what we believe is right. So I think that's huge. I I think if you look at the blind faith that people put in their religious leaders, so we are prepared to hand over all of our ethical decision making, not we, because you and I aren't, but people who go to churches, we're putting blind faith in those leaders to tell us how to think, how to live, how to be. And we see the impact of that with cults, which are, just maybe overzealous religions. Um, I think they're divisive. There is this message that, it's us against them in a society where a bit of we would go a long way. If you look at specific groups that are targeted by religions, for example, the LGBTQ plus population, in some cases, it's simply a matter that they're not accepted in the church, but in others, there are overt anti-religious messages. And we put faith, I keep using the word faith, in these organizations to supply a lot of our social services. So think about being gay and showing up at the Salvation Army to look for food. Like, in order to get that food, you have to almost denounce who you are. And that's terrible. And when we give money to a soup kitchen that's run by a religious charity, are we requiring that poor people go and pray and exhibit some type of handing over of their values to this group in order to get food? Like, is that okay that you're held hostage because you're hungry? So often, I think that we have this idea that these religious groups are good and helpful, and therefore we are giving transfers to them to do this work. But we're not saying, but you have to do it for everyone. So if you have a Christian charity providing a food bank, can Muslims access that food bank? So in general, I think, maybe some of those organizations are doing good. I really don't know. But I would say that if they really want to do good, they should do it outside of their religious purposes.
All right. So, last question. We've identified that there's $5.6 billion going to religious charities. What should we, or what should the government of Canada do? What change would you like to see happen as a result of this analysis that would you, in your view, would make Canada a more just, more fair, and more secular nation?
So I have a two-part answer. So the simple thing is I believe that advancement of religion should be removed as a charitable purpose. That's simple. I mean, I know it's not simple, but it's a simple answer. I think that the notion that strictly advancing religion is good is out of date. It actually comes from a 1601 ruling by the British House of Lords. Like, that's how long it's been around. It's too old. It needs to go. In addition to that, however, I think that the whole issue of religious orders running charities is problematic. So, if we were to eliminate the advancement of religion as a charitable purpose, which I think a lot of people could probably agree to, we still have Catholic organizations running family counseling centers. So, think about it. You're a Catholic organization, you run an organization that provides social work outreach to people in need of counseling. What if those people are gay? What's the advice that they're getting? It's terrifying when you actually think about
Right.
it. What if
Or if they are incompatible, and the best advice would be for them to have a divorce, or if there's a complication in a woman's pregnancy, and the medical advice is that there should be an abortion to essentially save the mother's life.
what if you're raped and you show up at a Catholic hospital and they won't give you the morning after pill? Like, what if you're a student at Trinity Western University and you have to sign a covenant saying you're not going to have sex outside of marriage, and you agree that marriage is only heterosexual? Like, there are so many terrible examples of this. The fact is, the government makes rulings and then they create exemptions. Catholic hospitals or Catholic organizations, possibly other faith-based organizations, don't have to provide medical assistance in dying. And yet, medical assistance in dying is legislated in Canada to be okay. So, how is it okay that you have a faith group that overrules the legality of the country? So, simple answer: let's open up the what makes a charity and get rid of the 32,000 organizations that identify as
And what do we do with those 32,000? I mean, we're not proposing that they just fold up and go bankrupt, or that the government confiscate their assets. What happens to those 32,000 organizations that are currently registered as a charity for the advancement of religion?
So they all would be able to reapply for charitable status doing something different. So in the example of the Wise, they certainly could reapply for charitable status under other causes that are beneficial to society. And there are many examples of Wise that are registered under that. So I assume that that would be a pretty simple switch, right? So if they're legitimately doing secular charity work, they go there. If they're a house of worship, a church, a synagogue, a temple, there likely are some benefits to the people who attend them, the same as, I'm going to come back to my bridge club. There are great benefits to me to play bridge.
Mm-hmm.
But you shouldn't have to pay for those benefits for me, correct?
Agreed.
So I am very happy for people to be able to go to church every week. Absolutely. And the same way that I put my money in a plate to play bridge every week, they can continue to put their money in a plate to go to church. But they pay for it. I want to pay for it.
So instead of being a charity, they would be a nonprofit. They would just reincorporate as a nonprofit and go from there.
Giddy up. Yeah. And then the people who want to go can pay to go, but I don't have to pay for them to go.
Right. And then that would come. That will, in one perspective, that will save $5.6 billion a year from the Canadian taxpayer. But another perspective is that means that we would be burdening religious organizations with an additional $5.5+ billion to support those organizations at their current levels.
So if so in fairness, some of those transfers might still happen. Like, again, the why. But if you believe in the Catholic faith, the Jewish faith, whatever, pay have no objection to that, but why shouldn't you pay for it? Because if my bridge club can't afford to sustain itself with the dues paid by its members, why should a church? What benefit do I have that a group of people who believe in something that I don't believe in come together once a week in a building?
Sandra, this has been great. Any last thoughts? Any last messages for our listeners?
The one thing I wrote down that I didn't tell you about is our religious charity. People might be interested. Our religious charities collectively have assets of $38 billion. Remembering that those assets include the book value of the properties. They are very wealthy. So I am not terribly concerned about burdening them.
Okay. Well, this has been great. Sandra Dunham, Executive Director for the Centre for Inquiry Canada, thank you for appearing on Podcast for Inquiry today.
Thanks, Leslie. I hope that people will read the reports and, I don't know, write to your MP and say, this isn't acceptable anymore.
Thanks again.
All right. Have a great day.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Links for today's discussion can be found in the show notes. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please show your support at patreon.com/podcastforinquiry and give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Email us podcast@centerforinquiry.ca. We'd love to hear your perspective. The Podcast for Inquiry is brought to you by the Centre for Inquiry Canada. We are a national educational charity supporting reason, compassion, and secular values. Help us support rational discourse and evidence-based decision-making by becoming a member at centerforinquiry.ca/join. CFIC is on the web and Facebook and Twitter at CFI Canada. Podcast for Inquiry is produced and edited by Zach Dumont and Martin Zielinski. Music by Anthony Lazaro. I'm your host, Leslie Rosenblood. See you next time.